Hello everybody, in this tutorial I'm going to show you how to create a simple SQLite server using ESP32 and Arduino language. So before starting, we have some necessities like ESP32 board and SD card connector, and also a Arduino ID or Visual Studio Code ID, and also we need an SD card. And first thing, we have to format our SD card, and the ESP32 file system can recognize it. That is FAT32 and 32 kilobytes allocation unit size. And let's format it. And now our SD card is ready to run. And second, we need to create an SQLite database. So this can be done with an SQLite manager or SQLite browser. So I'm gonna use SQLite browser that can be downloaded. You can search on the internet, Google, and click the first link that is shown on the screen and click the download, and according to your operating system you can pick one of the installer links on the list. So I'm gonna use a standard installer for 64-bit Windows. So I already download and install it. So next thing, open the database browser and create a new database. So that is very simple. Create a new database, pick the location, which is our SD card on the USB driver, and give a name of your database. So in this tutorial I'm going to use the company name. And then, so we just created our database, and database has to include some tables, and the name of the table, the first table of our project, and we use employees like a classic. And then we need to add some fields on our table, so we can call and edit, or we can show on the screen. So the first field is always the ID. ID has to be an integer value and has to be auto incremented. And then second field, our personal ID. Every employee has its own ID number. And then the name, which has to be a text, and the surname, which also has to be a text, and also we have a start date, which is also a text. And the most important thing is our salary, which all of us relies on. So for once you click OK, your employee table is created and all the fields are shown. And if you browse the data, you can see nothing because the database and the table is empty. So the important thing is you have to edit the specifications of the database for ESP32 can understand it. So the page size has to be shrink down, has to be reduced for our project. So I'm gonna use the 512, which is the lowest value. So that's it. Our database has been created. For the next step, we should create a new record in our table, so we can browse or we can insert and delete some data into it. So to do it, we just click the browse data and insert new field. Just the ID is auto incremented, so you don't have to change anything about it because it doesn't affect anything. So just give it a personal ID, let's say 1001, and the name doctor, surname, who, start date 1st January 1950, and the salary is, let's say, 50,000. Okay, we just created our new record and write changes, and it's recorded and saved into our database. So the next step is to create some new code and read this data and insert new data and also delete some records from this database. So close. We need to open the favorite IDE, which I can use the Visual Studio Code, create new project with using Platform.io, and new project name SQL ESP32. The board is whatever the ESP board you are using. I'm using the Espressif dev module, and the framework is Arduino, of course, because we're going to use the Arduino. And to finish, let the IDE prepare everything for us. So we need to include some libraries to do this job. So there are some smart people already made some libraries for this purpose. So just search on the internet, like say SQLite, Arduino, and Platform.io. And the second click, you see that there are plenty of excellent examples for this, and I used one of the examples to create our new code. And so installation, let's click the installation, and then it says give some options, and the most convenient of them is this. We just copy it and paste. Also, we need to configure our communication port, serial terminal. Let's monitor speed is 115/200, and that's it. And let's get back to the source code of it. So I already wrote down a code which is for convenience to save some time. So I use that examples from the libraries page, which is pretty neat and very easy to understand. Let's get started to look at our code. At the beginning, we just include some libraries, SPI and file system, and also SD, because we're going to use the SD card and file system to call the database file, and then create some function declarations. We are going to define it later. So the OpenDB, as you can clearly understand, is OpenDB is open our database file, and DB exactly is called the SQLite strings and execute. And the callback function is when you execute the SQLite functions, and then when the SQL function is over, the callback function is called to do some job. And we will see later. For now, and let's say we create our database file. Let's say company DB, I give it that name, and begin the SPI and SD, and SQLite initialize. That means we initialize our library, we initialize our class, and then open the database file, which is SD card and the company DB as we previously named it. And then this is our executions. We insert an employee name and John Doe, and give some values to these columns on this database, and then show the records, show every record on the employee table, and then remove the personal ID, which is 1002, and it is exactly the newly inserted value on the table and then just show the employee table again, so we can see the difference. So that's it. That's a simple example of it. And let's say the functions inside the database, which is very easy. It will automatically call the SQLite open function and creates and returns code. And if the return code, we have a return code, and that means we have a fail, and then fail message should be shown on the serial port. And then dp execute and also callback functions. In this case, the callback functions prints every incoming, every data from the database file, which is including the column name and the values of that columns. So at the end of the file, it stops. So before reaching the end of the file, it continues to print every detail from the database file. So let's remove our SD card from the computer, insert it our board, and connect our board to our computer and upload it. Now it's compiled successfully and uploading the board, our ESP32 chip. And now it's done. Just open the serial monitor. So you can see the database successfully opened and a new record. Our new record is John Doe and the start date 1st. And exactly the same of Doctor Who, and the salary is 1000. And record deleted. Which record is deleted? And it is the personal ID 1002. So you can see the final image of our database file. So we could now create a database, insert some values, show the values, and also to delete some values. And of course we can enhance this example by adding new comments, new data SQL comments to the string. So in this example, I think it is enough to move the next step. Okay, after many attempts and debugging process and consuming hours, I finally successfully run a web page that updates our database table. So I don't want to show you how I wrote this code because it is complicated. I'm not a programmer. I just copy and paste it and change accordingly. So, but I'm gonna explain how that works and how you make your own. So, as a difference from the previous step, we just included a Wi-Fi function, and Wi-Fi function is a built-in function on the ESP Arduino core. So you just include these libraries, and this is my credits and page credits file that holds the Wi-Fi credentials, and so you cannot see mine. And also the web page. Web page is our front end, and as you know, every web server has two sides. One is front end, one is back end. Front end is the page that the user can interact with, like buttons or input fields or images or something like that. You can see it. But the back end is the main function that process background and do some job, like creating new records, erasing some data or whatever. So is this main CPP is our backend, and I create a web page for this constant and variable. So I will explain later. The first thing I'm gonna explain is the background job. So as a difference, we just need to create some functions that calls the SQLite functions. So whenever the user types our IP address and hit enter, the handle root function automatically called. This is a regular thing, and whenever the user types and different address than that this is, and it is not included, it's not going to call anything. The not found handle not found function automatically called, and it says you just typed something wrong. And the others are insert, delete, and show. Whenever the user types these addresses, these functions will be called on the address line, and these functions will be declared here, defined here. So let's say the setup function, I will explain step by step, and then the function we first create our Wi-Fi server, which is, and let's say giving our Wi-Fi SSID and the password, which is included in the credentials. So you have to give some value for yours and waiting for your Wi-Fi connections. And whenever the Wi-Fi is connected, it gives you IP address, so we can type that IP address to our web browser and so begin the server. And then it's the regular function for SPI and SD card beginning, initialize the SQLite3 class and open the database. So we just created our web server and open our database, and we are waiting for the client. And the loop function has only one function is called on the loop function, because we just need the client and inputs, and we just serve as a web server, so just we need only handle client functions for the loop. It's a continuous infinite loop. And OpenDB and the dbexec functions are the same, and the only difference is the callback functions. As you know, the callback function is called, and after dbexec function is completed. So you know the callback function is also defined here. So I will call it just now, wait a little bit. And this is handle root, which shows us the web page. Whenever our IP address is typed on the web browser, and it gives you the web page. This page is shown on the browser. And this is a handle not function, is a regular function. You can see on every example, every Wi-Fi server example. And now insert record example. Whenever the user types the insert address on the web browser, or we call it, it gives some parameters from the previous page, like personal ID, name, surname, and creates a SQL string, SQL command string, and execute it. And after the execution, if it is okay, it gives you the web and like an answer, respond as an okay. If it's fail, it fails. But we are not going to see this, because we are going to use an Ajax, and if you are using the static web pages, you can see this response, but we are not going to see it, because we just, and after the execution of this command, we just load another page immediately, so we don't see this. And delete record is the same and as the previous one. We just get from some data from the user and from previous page, like button, or it gives an personal ID, and if the personal ID comes from the user interface, it matches the personal ID on the table, it automatically deletes that row and gives some response, like again okay and fail. And show records are the most complicated one. Whenever we need the show record function is called, it creates a table, but it's an empty table, because the table will be filled with callback functions. it creates an empty table and select everything on the table, employee table, and execute the SQL string. And then SQL string, after the SQL string executed, it calls the callback functions, and callback function, as you remember, is called repeatedly until they're reaching the table. So every column, it calls the callback function is called on for every column. So every column is and created some new columns on the table and new rows. So that basically creates a table and fills our table for the show content. And then the table will be shown on the web page. And I will give you the exactly how it works. A new record table is just a static table that gives us an input, not doing any job. It gives us on a table, so we can use that table and create new data. So this is our backend. Let's look at the front end. A front end is a regular web pages. If you are familiar with HTML coding, you can clearly understand this is a style, and this is a CSS code that gives some better looking. So if you don't use them, it's okay, but it's better to use. And also we need some functions, because we are not going to use the static web pages and we don't load every page individually. We just use one page, a main page. After the main page loaded, it automatically calls a load show function, and the ID division, we have a division called like table. We fill that table area with an content of a show page, and show page gives them the table, and we can see immediately after the loading of the page, of the main page, we can see the content of our table, our database table actually. And the new record table, we gives and calls the new record functions and prepare us a new page, so we can fill that fields and click the buttons. So whenever the insert button is clicked, the insert function is called, and the insert function takes some data from the input fields like PID, PName, that values as used as parameters to the insert page. So like as you can previously remember, insert page takes some data from the page, the previous page, and these are the datas that we have to send that page. So whenever the page sends the data to insert page, and the insert page is completely successfully loaded, it calls automatic load functions to show our table content again, so we can see the difference. So again, the delete function is the same as the insert function. Send some parameters, and that parameter is personal ID, and send it to this functions, and we use that parameter and delete that row accordingly, the parameters and the personal ID. And the cancel is as the name. If we are if you don't want to insert a new value, we just click the cancel button, and the cancel button show the table content again. So 5 functions enough to do main jobs. You can add new ones as you wish. So there's nothing, just a small button, insert button, and we just, whenever call the insert button, it's just a new record page opens. That's it, nothing more. So let's upload the code, and I will explain something more on the run. Just upload it. Okay, let's now start connecting to Wi-Fi, and database successfully opened, and the Wi-Fi address is this, and I just open new one, just hit enter, and you can see we have some records on our table, and whenever the page is loaded it calls the show record function, and show records function gives us the table. And every, you know, the personal ID, name, doctor, and also we added a button which is delete, and the delete is called the delete function. Delete functions gives that parameters personal ID to delete function on the background, and then it removes that row from the table, and after the removal, and it calls the show content again, and now we just dynamically upload our page. So when we click the insert new record, it gives the table. So we have some inputs. Let's something meaningless. Whenever we call the insert button, insert function will be called, and after the insert function successfully completed its operation, and it calls the show content again. So we have new record dynamically. So whenever you call the delete, it deletes the record. So that's it. That's the main operation. If you want to know exactly what happens, just call. Let's give you some example like that. We show, let's show, try to show address. As you can see, we have a content of the table, but there is no CSS, there is no style. It's shown like this, but it's enough. And the delete function will not be working because it is nested on another page. It's not going to work. And also just say, let's type another file. Let's say new record table. Okay, that gives you the input fields that we used to create a new record on a table. So again, the functions will not be useful because it is nested in this page. So this is it, and I think you can clearly understand what I mean. You can create your own web pages, your dynamic web pages. And also I have to say something about the Arduino IDE, because I'm using the Visual Studio Code, and if you are using the regular Arduino IDE, you have to include this library on the library manager by searching this one. And after the library is included, the whole code will work perfectly without any changes. So I think there is nothing much to say. Thank you for watching. If you have questions, you can write a comment, and I'm trying to explain. And this whole code will be shared in the descriptions with the links that the pages I used for this video. Thank you very much.